Hey, good Tuesday morning to you. It's a Tuesday, 2/22/22. We are excited about getting an opportunity to share with you from God's Word. We're looking at Acts chapter 14, beginning with verse 8. It's rained a little bit at my house. I had an inch this morning when I got up at 6. Anyway, let's look at verse 8 and read a little further and see what happens. It says, "In Lystra, a certain man without strength in his feet was sitting a cripple from his mother's womb who had never walked. This man heard Paul speaking. Paul, observing him intently and seeing that he had faith to be healed, said with a loud voice, 'Stand straight on your feet.' And he leaped up and walked. Now when the people saw what Paul had done, they raised their voices, saying in the Lycaonian language, 'The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men.' And Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. Then the priest of Zeus, whose temple was in the front of their city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates, intending to sacrifice with multitudes. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard this, they tore their clothes and ran in among the multitude, crying out and saying, 'Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men with the same nature as you, and preach to you that you should turn from these useless things to the living God, who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all things that are in them, who in bygone generations allowed our nations to walk in their own ways. Nevertheless, he did not leave himself without a witness, in that he did good, gave us rain from heaven in fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness.' And with these sayings, they could scarcely restrain the multitudes from sacrificing to them. Then the Jews from Antioch and Iconium came there, and having persuaded the multitudes, they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, supposing him to be dead. However, when the disciples gathered around him, he rose up and went into the city, and the next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe." Well, a couple of three things just want to point out to you. This one who was lame, couldn't walk from birth. It said Paul was speaking, but Paul observing him intently and seeing that he had the faith to be healed. It isn't Paul who did the healing, it was the man, and Paul just spoke to him that he could do it. We do see healings in the Bible. We see healings sometimes in our life if God chooses. The difficulty is that how we respond when God decides not to heal. And so Paul speaks, says, "Rise your feet," he does. But I want you to see what the people do. They see this, and they say, "The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men." This is a turning point for many leaders, and it is the position of many followers. When a leader does something good, when a man of God is part of something good, people want to raise them up on a pedestal and worship them. And we should never do that. And so it says they called Barnabas Zeus and Paul Hermes because he was the chief speaker. And so they came and they were intending to sacrifice. But listen how Paul and Barnabas responded. The apostles Barnabas and Paul heard this. They tore their clothes and ran in among the multitude, crying out, "Why are you doing these things? We are also men the same nature as you." And so they wouldn't allow it. They said, no, we're the same as you, and we want to tell you about the living God. He's left a witness, and you need to follow him. And it says it was hard. It said that they had a hard time restraining them from sacrificing to them. But they took their stand. Then I want you to see what happens. It says the Jews from Antioch and Iconium came there, and having persuaded the multitudes, they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, supposing him to be dead. He's a rock star one day, and the next day they're rocking him. We live in a fickle world. People want you to be the hero or the villain. They can't accept the fact that God is God and we are his servants. One thing that always kind of amazed me was in verse 20 it says, the disciples gathered around him. He rose up and went into the city, and the next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe. Can you imagine being Barnabas, the faithful one, the encourager who's always there? How many times have you seen Paul beaten and stoned and in prison? And yet he continues on with the journey. I pray today that you will be an encourager to others, that you will come alongside them no matter what difficulties are in, that you will keep them in the straight path, and you will encourage them to give God the glory, and that you'll do that yourself. Pray you have a blessed day. Know that you're loved. Try to stay dry, and as always at Westview, hey, we're here for you. So you have a great one, and God bless.